A cold ember from another sun crosses the dark like a theorem in motion, and for a heartbeat the starlight behind it wavers, as if space itself blinked. We name it because names help us hold the unholdable. 3I Atlas, the third confirmed interstellar visitor to thread our sky, as indifferent to our calendars as it is to our boundaries. The telescope arrays register the first hints as a change in the sky's arithmetic. Pixels rising where nothing should rise, a residual blooming in the differenced frames that says something moved against the vault of fixed light. The orbit solvers wake, fit hyperbolas to the trickle of points, and a trajectory emerges that refuses to be tamed by the gravity of our small, bright star. In a control room that smells of coffee and cold air, a dozen pairs of eyes watch the curve sharpen, and for a moment the chatter quiets, the machines hum alone, and the ancient mystery visits us anew. What is it, and why does it seem to bend light? Designated 3I Atlas by the survey that caught its signature, the object writes its credentials in velocities and angles, speaking with the accent of other suns. Hyperbolic excess velocity v sketches a clean escape. Eccentricity greater than one refuses circular compromise. It drifts into our neighborhood carrying the memory of distant cloud banks, Oort shells around forgotten stars, or perhaps the debris lanes of worlds that did not finish forming. Through the atmosphere's shimmer, we comb the arrival for context. Oumuamua taught us humility. Borisov apologized for our lack of readiness by being a more classic comet. This one refuses to be either, wearing a cloak that is too subtle for a comet and too active for an asteroid. It flashes with brightness variations that do not repeat with the obedience of a spinning rock, and in a handful of serendipitous frames, the background stars appear to quiver and affect at the T, threshold of our instruments, but persistent enough to compel the word that fractures certainty, lensing. We build our understanding from the ground up, counts to flux, flux to spectra, spectra to composition, knowing that each step is a wager against the abyss. Photometric curves gathered across multiple bands trace a quiet heartbeat, modest outgassing near perihelion, low albedo surface material that drinks sunlight rather than scatters it, and a thermal inertia curve that feels almost curated, as if heat were being absorbed and released on a timetable. Spectroscopy returns a reticent palette, weak signatures of volatiles, whispers of carbonaceous compounds, and a reflectance slope that could belong to a soot-darkened body or to something deliberately engineered to hide in the infrared. Radar pings glance off its skin and come back thin, giving us only the ghost of a shape, elongated, perhaps sheet-like, with edges too crisp for dirty snow. The light curves refuse a single spin model. Moments of specular glints hint at flat facets. Yet the aggregate suggests a tumbling dance out of phase with our expectations. We stack and align, reject and recalibrate, and the portrait remains a riddle. Then the anomaly steps from the wings with the patience of inevitability. Against models tuned with cautious pessimism, the trajectory shows subtle, non-gravitational accelerations that cannot be fully explained by sublimation jets or solar radiation pressure alone. Milliard-second wobbles line up with instances when its apparent path crosses bright star fields, and in those frames, the stars behind it look thinner, as though someone had drawn them through a filament. Weak microlensing at this scale should require more mass. Weak refraction would require structured material with specific optical properties. Either we are mismeasuring our own heartbeat, or the object is wearing a skin that persuades photons to change their minds. The equations bridle, and then, with the grace of good science, they listen. Speculation is not a dereliction here. It is a disciplined reaching. If 3I Atlas carries a thin film structure, a metamaterial sail perhaps, whose index gradients coax light to curve, it could sail on photon pressure while also shaping the field of starlight behind it. Graphene composites, dielectric stacks a few hundred nanometers thick, phase gradient metasurfaces. Phrases from our laboratories suddenly sit on the sky like prophecies. A natural explanation jostles for primacy too. A laminated crust from eons in interstellar space, irradiated into glassy sheets. A fractal frost that grows into planes. A lensing coincidence produced by a pebble swarm in the foreground. But there is a way the data hums when you allow yourself to test the idea of intent, and that is when caution becomes a virtue rather than a break. An alien probe, a light sail, a fragment of a larger structure, these hypotheses must wear the weight of proof, and our duty is to fit them with that weight or watch them fall. Coincidence, that mischievous statistician, leans in. The most pronounced episodes of apparent light bending appear during short lulls in the solar wind when the heliosphere's breath slackens and photon pressure relative to charged particle flux becomes a clearer drumbeat. The timing of our best observations lines up with gaps in terrestrial interference, a rare patchwork of clear skies across hemispheres, a radio-quiet interval born of maintenance cycles. We find ourselves suspecting choreography where randomness should suffice. Even the geometry of its entry, skimming a plane that brushes Earth's orbital path at an angle conducive to radar range-finding, feels like a kindness from fate or design. We list the alignments, feed them to Monte Carlo engines, and watch the histograms bloom into unlikely petals. Unlikely is not impossible, but in science, a bouquet of unlikelies becomes a demand for explanation. Gravity writes the grand script, and 3i Atlas reads it with a fluency that would make a navigator weep. Approaching the sun, it trades potential for speed and carves a perihelion arc that reaches toward Mercury's track before climbing outward. Its path experiences gravitational shear from Jupiter's vast well, a tug that a free-falling stone would wear differently than a sail trimming for efficiency. Tiny differences in perigee timing and altitude would tune its outbound aim by millions of kilometers far afield. The detected non-gravitational accelerations, if aligned with the sun object vector, could be sail-like thrust. We simulate the path with and without photon pressure, with isotropic outgassing, and with directed vents. And the variants that match the data best include a term that looks suspiciously like guidance. Thrust when it matters, silence when it does not. If it is natural, the rocks of the cosmos have discovered a way to listen to light. If it is not, someone did. There is a week, a crucial week, when the universe turns off the lights in our theater. Clouds gather over key observatories. A hardware fault steals hours from a deep radar dish. A software patch delays synoptic scanning by a night. The ionosphere ripples just enough to smear the radio returns. In that blackout, rumor invents shape and motive. A brief whisper leaks from a back-channel lab note, an unconfirmed dip in a stellar diffraction pattern as the object crossed a bright field. The note retracts itself a day later, citing calibration errors. We are left with negative space and a human tendency to fill it with narrative. We remind ourselves that absence of data is only that. We promise the sky we will not betray it with certainty dressed as story, yet suspicion hangs like a comet's tail. What would it mean if thin skins could bend light and drink momentum from photons for our ambitions and our fears? It would mean that sails the width of countries could be rolled like film and unfurled in dark orbits, whispering outward to the nearer stars on beams of sunlight or laser light. It would mean that probes could arrive silent, powered by fields of light rather than contrails of reaction mass, and that those probes could hide in reflectance curves designed to look like the universe's own noi. See, it would mean that communication might ride on the tight pinpricks of specular flashes, encoding messages in glints lost to all but prepared eyes. These are technologies we sketch in proposal papers and incubate in test beds. To find them in our sky as artifacts would be to discover that the ladder we are building has already been climbed. But it would also mean that nature, if she is the artist here, has techniques we have barely guessed. irradiated ice that self-assembles into lenses, porosity gradients that mimic metamaterials, fractal surfaces whose phase delays add, not in chaos, but in optimization. Interstellar space is not empty. It is a laboratory without walls, and time is plentiful. Objects marinate in radiation and dust for eons long enough to learn the language of order by accident. A film micrometers thick could survive if supported by a scaffolding of frozen volatiles that boil into a main at perihelion, leaving a ghost sail that works just long enough to tilt a path by a handful of arcseconds. The natural and the engineered meet in the great Venn diagram of the possible, and our task is to color the intersection with data. So we watch the gravitational ballet with a craftsman's respect. The object slides past the sun, takes a whisper of impulse from the great furnace, and threads the resonances like a needle through fabric. The invariants of celestial mechanics become a loom, and 3i Atlas weaves an outbound vector that will carry it past the orbits of the giants and into the soft country of the Kuiper Belt. If it knows how to read gravity the way our navigators read currents, it will time its minimal thrusts to exploit the turning of the planets. A sail can break into a slingshot and then harden its angle to harvest a final push. A natural body can only be pulled. We look for signatures of trim, shifts in acceleration, aligned not with the sun alone, but with the instantaneous bisector between sun and target planet, the hallmark of light pressure used with intent. The numbers crouch at our detection threshold, daring us to claim more than we can defend. Humanity responds with the best we have. Emergency proposals fly. Time on telescopes is begged, borrowed, rerouted. A cube of mirrors and CCDs on a high plateau opens its shutters. A spacecraft in Earth-trailing orbit slews to take a look by infrared eyes. A radar array that once listened for the faint die-outs of pulsars turns its attention to something much nearer and maddeningly ambiguous. We prepare hypothetical intercept options we cannot launch in time. A nanosail to match the object's plane and sample its wake, a strobing laser to test for engineered diffraction, a swarm of small listeners to triangulate any purposeful emission. Even planning is a sacrament. It trains the mind and the machines for the next arrival. In war rooms of curiosity, new collaboration blooms. Astronomers talk to photonics engineers, propulsion dreamers to exoplanet biochemists, philosophers to statisticians, because in the presence of maybe all disciplines are neighbors. Somewhere in this careful storm, we must address he word that built our skeletons for meaning, alien. If 3i Atlas is a messenger, it speaks a dialect that might be more art than language. An engineered sail would not necessarily talk. It could be a gift or a drift, a shard of a grander device, a skin shed like the shell of a cicada. It could be a surveyor built to be seen only in the physics it exploits, an invitation to read, not to listen. If we are being observed, there is no malice in the path, no looming perigee that threatens collision, no lash-tight beeline toward our homeworld. We are, perhaps, a waypoint on a map that spans the spiral arm, a calibration point for lenses that taste starlight like rain. The absence of hostility is not proof of kindness, but it is an empirical mercy. And yet the gentler truth might be stranger, that we are watching an accident of beauty and calling it intention, because beauty is how we recognize ourselves. The cosmos specializes in structures that look designed, spiral galaxies, hexagons at the poles of gas giants, the filigree of ice on a window, the exactness of resonance chains in exoplanetary systems. A thin planar shard wandering between stars might simply be a survivor of an ancient catastrophe. A planetary crust, shattered, vitrified, annealed by starlight into a gossamer that sails because that is what light teaches it to do. The lensing would be a side effect. The specular hints, a coincidence of angles, the non-gravitational accelerations. A chorus of photon pushes and outgassing whispers. In that reading, the universe remains the artist, and we remain students trying to copy her brushstrokes. Whatever the truth, the implications converge on the same practical commandment. Build better eyes and braver hands. We will need synoptic surveys that scan the sky with a pulse shorter than rumor's half-life. interferometers that can resolve an object's edge well enough to deny ambiguity, its favorite shadows. Multi-wavelength fleets that marry radio clarity to optical finesse and infrared patience. We will need laser arrays that can push sails outward and pull information inward, and we will need sails themselves, test beds that teach us how light can be a river that moves more than vision. We will need to accept that interstellar visitors are not rare but unmissed, and that our capacity to notice is the narrowest aperture in the system. The next 3I will come whether or not we are ready. Readiness is the only variable we can control. There is a temptation, finally, to ask what this means for us as a species, hungry for mirrors and for windows. If 3I Atlas carries technology, then somewhere else minds wrestled their environment into film and phase and sail, and they chose or were forced to send a piece of themselves into the quiet. If it is natural, then the universe has again outdone our imaginations by producing something we would have sworn was ours alone to invent. In both cases, hope survives. We are not alone in the business of making meaning from light. We are not alone in the furnace of curiosity. The poems we write about the stars may be provincial, but the grammar of wonder is universal. As the object recedes, the sky stitches itself back together. The background stars stop their nervous trembling. The accelerations decay into the certainties of escape. The name we gave it remains, a placeholder in the ledger of our encounter with everything that is not us. Our archives receive petabytes of second chances. Our calibrations improve because we were embarrassed by what we could not say. Our future missions breathe a little harder because the oxygen of mystery is in the air again. We will tell children about this, and they will build instruments that would have seemed like spells to us. They will watch the next visitor with eyes that do not blink. We stand then at the clean edge of audacity. We can decide to be the kind of civilization that waits for omens or the kind that builds them. We can become sailors of light, crafting films that feel the sun and tack against the photon wind toward Proxima's red harbor. We can become cartographers of gravitational whispers, mapping slingshots with the finesse of a falcon's dive. We can learn to listen to the dark without inventing voices and to speak with machines that move by radiance alone. Whether 3I Atlas was a messenger or a miracle of accident, it brought us a polished question. Are you ready to meet the universe halfway? The rest is our answer, written in arrays and sails, and the long, beautiful patience of looking up